The twin suns of Erythra 6 hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged, rust-red terrain. Captain Elena Grant stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the mining colony's makeshift fortifications. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, searching for movement in the distance. The air was heavy with anticipation and dust, and the faint hum of distant mining drills underscored the eerie quiet. Behind her, Sergeant Malik climbed up, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. "Scouts just reported back," he said, his voice grim. "The Ankara fleet has landed on the eastern plains. They'll be here by nightfall." Elena didn't look away from the horizon. "How many?" 3 battalions, at least. Drones, armored walkers, plasma artillery, the usual," Malik replied, crossing his arms. "And here we are with rifles that barely hold a charge." Elena allowed herself a wry smile. "Plasma doesn't win wars, Malik. Strategy does. Remember that." Malik exhaled sharply, his skepticism clear. "Strategy's not going to stop their drones from turning us into ash." Elena turned to face him, her expression firm. "Then we don't let them use their drones. They're expecting us to fight like they do, head-on, tech against tech. We won't play by their rules." Before Malik could respond, a sharp crackle came through Elena's comm link. "Captain, incoming broadcast from the Ankara flagship," one of her officers reported. "Patch it through," Elena said, descending the slope with Malik close behind. In the command tent, a hologram flickered to life, projecting the towering figure of General Tveil Jorik. The Ankara officer stood clad in gleaming silver armor, his crimson cape flowing behind him. His reptilian features twisted into a smirk as his glowing amber eyes swept over the assembled humans. "People of Erythra 6, Tveil began, his voice dripping with disdain. "You have shown commendable persistence, clinging to this barren rock despite your evident inferiority. But persistence alone does not grant you the right to resist the inevitable. Surrender now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be annihilated." Elena stepped forward, her expression cold. "You're quite confident for someone who's never faced us on equal footing." Tveil chuckled, the sound echoing unnaturally through the tent. "Equal footing? You speak as though your outdated weapons and primitive tactics could ever challenge the might of the Ankara Empire. I offer you mercy out of pity, not necessity. Do not mistake my kindness for weakness." The hologram blinked out, leaving the tent in silence. Malik broke it with a bitter laugh. "Charming guy. He's not wrong about one thing, though: we are outmatched." Elena's jaw tightened. "Let him underestimate us. It'll make our victory that much sweeter." By nightfall, the Ankara arrived. Their forces rolled across the plains like a mechanical tide. Sleek drones hovered in formation, emitting a faint blue glow, while armored walkers stomped forward, their plasma cannons glowing ominously in the twilight. Elena stood at the front line, her troops arrayed behind her. The militia was a ragtag group of miners, mechanics, and farmers armed with repurposed mining equipment and aging rifles. They were tired and scared, but their eyes followed Elena with unwavering trust. "Hold the line!" Elena called out, her voice carrying over the rising whine of approaching drones. "Wait for my command!" The first wave hit hard. The Ankara drones swooped down, unleashing searing plasma bolts that cut through the human defenses like a hot knife through butter. Explosions tore through the outposts, scattering debris and sending soldiers scrambling for cover. "Fall back to the ridge!" Elena shouted into her comlink. "Now!" Her forces retreated in a controlled chaos, moving toward the natural choke points of the canyons. Elena stayed behind, directing suppressive fire to buy her troops time. She fired her rifle at an advancing walker, the weapon's pulse shaking in her hands. The energy bolt fizzled harmlessly against the walker's shimmering shield. "Captain, we can't hold here!" Malik's voice crackled over the comlink. "I know," Elena muttered. She aimed for the drone's propulsion unit, managing to hit it with a lucky shot. The drone spiraled out of control and crashed into the dirt. "But we're not holding. We're luring them in." By the time the militia regrouped in the narrow canyon, the Ankara forces were celebrating their supposed victory. In the Ankara command tent, Tveo received reports of minimal human resistance. Pathetic, he scoffed, swirling a goblet of some luminescent liquid. Is this the best humanity has to offer? A few scattered outposts and antique rifles? I almost regret coming here. It's hardly a challenge. One of his aides, a younger Ankara officer, hesitated before speaking. General, the humans may be retreating to regroup. Should we proceed with caution? Tveo's smirk widened. Caution? Against them? You overestimate these primitives. Send the drones ahead to flush them out. Their suffering amuses me. In the canyon, Elena paced between her officers as they assessed their dwindling resources. The retreat had cost them dearly. Half their vehicles were destroyed, and dozens of soldiers were injured or dead. This isn't sustainable, Malik said bluntly, tossing his helmet onto a nearby crate. We can't keep running from them, Elena. I'm not planning to, she replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed a steely determination. We're going to make our stand here. With what? Harsh language? Malik snapped. No, Elena said, a small, enigmatic smile creeping onto her face. She gestured toward the back of the canyon, where a tarp-covered object loomed. With that. Malik followed her gaze and frowned. Is that a mortar? Not just one, Elena said, pulling back the tarp to reveal several rusted, ancient mortars salvaged from the colony's museum. There are more in storage. They're relics, sure, but they still work. And they're exactly what we need. Malik stared at her in disbelief. You're betting our survival on museum pieces? Yes, Elena said firmly. The Ankara's shields are designed to deflect energy weapons, not physical projectiles. Mortar fire will catch them off guard. They won't see it coming. The sergeant rubbed his temples. This is insane. No, Elena replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's strategy. They think we're primitive? Let's show them what primitive can do. Malik hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. Let's make it happen. As the night deepened, the militia worked tirelessly to set up the mortars. Soldiers received crash courses in their operation, while engineers retrofitted the weapons with mining explosives. Elena moved among them, offering encouragement and guidance. Above them, the Ankara drones began to sweep the canyon, their searchlights slicing through the darkness. The militia froze, holding their breath as the lights passed overhead. Keep quiet, Elena whispered, gripping her rifle tightly. We're not ready yet. The tension was suffocating, but no one wavered. When the drones finally moved on, the soldiers exhaled in relief. Elena looked up at the starlit sky, her jaw set. The Ankara thought this battle was already won. Tomorrow, they would learn just how wrong they were. The sun rose slowly over Erythra 6, casting an ember glow over the canyon. The air was heavy with tension and the faint metallic scent of mining dust. Elena Grant stood in the center of the camp, watching as her soldiers worked with quiet determination. Rusted mortars, their surfaces pitted from decades of neglect, sat in neat rows, their barrels tilted upward like sleeping giants waiting to awaken. Sergeant Malik approached, a skeptical frown creasing his weathered face. This is either the craziest idea I've ever seen or the most brilliant, he said, crossing his arms. But right now, it's leaning hard on crazy. Elena smirked faintly and turned to face him. Crazy might be exactly what we need. The Ankara don't expect us to think like this. They're so focused on their advanced tech, they can't imagine us using something this unconventional. Malik sighed and gestured toward the mortars. You've got the troops training with weapons older than any of us. Half of them didn't even know what a mortar was until yesterday. Which is why we're drilling them, Elena said firmly. She motioned to a group of soldiers crouched around one of the mortars, receiving instructions from an older engineer named Harlan. His gruff voice carried over the murmurs of the camp. Listen up! It's all about precision. Line up your sights, account for wind and terrain, and load carefully. You don't want to misfire, trust me. A young soldier raised her hand nervously. What if we miss? Harlan straightened, his piercing gaze settling on her. Then you reload and try again. And if you miss twice, you adjust until you don't. Got it? The soldier nodded, her face pale but determined. Elena walked over to inspect the operation. The mortars were being cleaned, their rust scraped away with whatever tools the engineers could find. Explosives were carefully repurposed from mining charges, packed into shells salvaged from storage. It wasn't elegant, but it would work, or so she hoped. Malik followed her, his voice quieter now. What happens if this fails? If the Ankara get through, there's no fallback position. This is it. Elena paused, her hand resting on the cool metal of a mortar. She looked at him, her expression resolute. If it fails, we fight to the last. But it won't fail, Malik. Trust me on this. He nodded reluctantly, then muttered under his breath. Still crazy. As the morning wore on, Elena gathered her senior officers for a briefing. A map of the canyon lay spread out on a table, marked with lines and circles showing the planned mortar positions. We're not just aiming to inflict damage, Elena explained, pointing to the narrowest part of the canyon. We're going to trap them. The mortars will target this choke point, bringing down enough debris to block their advance. Once they're stuck, we hit their rear units and pick them off one by one. Won't they just use their drones to spot us? An officer asked. They'll try, Elena said. But we've set up decoy positions to throw them off. By the time they figure out where we really are, it'll be too late. Harlan grinned, his hands smudged with grease and dust. They won't know what hit them. These old girls might be antiques, but they've got fight left in them. Malik leaned over the map, his brow furrowed. And what about Tfail? He's not an idiot. Once he realizes what we're doing, he'll adapt. Elena's lips tightened. We'll worry about that when it happens. For now, we stick to the plan. As night fell, the camp buzzed with a quiet, focused energy. Soldiers whispered to each other as they checked and rechecked their gear. The tension was palpable, but so was the determination. Elena moved among them, offering words of encouragement. She stopped by a group of younger recruits, their faces pale in the flickering light of the campfires. You're scared, she said, her voice gentle but firm. That's normal. Fear keeps you sharp. But remember this, we're not fighting for glory or territory. We're fighting for each other, for the people who couldn't be here to defend themselves. Stay focused, trust your training, and we'll get through this. One of the recruits, a wiry teenager named Sam, nodded hesitantly. You really think we can beat them, ma'am? Elena crouched to meet his gaze. I don't think it, I know it. They underestimate us. That's their biggest mistake. The first mortar test came just before midnight. A dull thump echoed through the canyon as the shell launched into the sky, arcing high before landing with a deafening explosion on a distant ridge. The ground shook, and a cheer erupted from the soldiers. Good shot! Harlan barked, clapping the nearest operator on the back. Now let's see if you can do it twice. Elena allowed herself a small smile as she watched. The pieces were coming together. The calm didn't last. Hours later, the Ankara sent out their drones, sweeping the canyon with searchlights. The faint hum of their propulsion systems grew louder as they neared the camp. Drones incoming! Malik hissed, ducking into the command tent. Everyone, stay low and quiet! Elena ordered. The soldiers froze, holding their breath as the lights passed overhead. One drone hovered dangerously close to a mortar position, its blue glow illuminating the terrified faces of the operators. Elena raised her rifle, ready to fire if necessary, but the drone moved on, its sensors failing to pick up the camouflaged weapons. When the drones finally retreated, the soldiers exhaled in relief. That was too close, Malik muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Elena nodded, her mind already racing. They're searching for us, which means they're close. We need to be ready by dawn. The hours before sunrise were a blur of activity. Soldiers loaded the mortars, calculated firing angles, and rehearsed their roles. Elena barely slept, her mind replaying every step of the plan, searching for flaws. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, she climbed to a vantage point overlooking the canyon. The Ankara forces were visible in the distance, their sleek, metallic forms gleaming in the sunlight. Malik joined her, his expression grim. "They're coming." Elena nodded, her jaws set. "Good. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The rising sun painted the canyon walls in hues of crimson and gold, but its beauty was lost on Captain Elena Grant. She crouched behind a rocky outcrop, her binoculars fixed on the advancing Ankara forces. Their battalions stretched across the horizon, a sea of gleaming armor, drones humming above them like a swarm of locusts. The walkers lumbered at the front, their massive plasma cannons glowing faintly, ready to obliterate anything in their path. Sergeant Malik slid into position beside her, his face set in grim determination. "They're in range. Just say the word." Elena lowered the binoculars and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. She glanced back at her soldiers, who crouched by the mortars, their faces pale but resolute. Harlan was barking last-minute adjustments, his grease-stained hands gesturing animatedly. "Hold," Elena murmured into her comlink. Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded in her chest. Timing was everything. They had one shot to make this work. The Ankara drones swept ahead, their searchlights cutting through the shadows. They hovered over decoy positions, empty spots deliberately rigged with false heat signatures and reflective panels. Plasma bolts rained down, and explosions echoed through the canyon as the drones obliterated what they believed to be human defenses. Elena allowed herself a grim smile. "Let them waste their ammo," she muttered. "Drones are moving on," Malik reported, his voice low. "They're not hitting our real positions." "They will soon," Elena replied. She keyed her comlink again. "Mortar teams, stand by." The Ankara forces pressed forward, their walkers stomping into the narrowest part of the canyon. The terrain forced their battalions to funnel into a tight formation, just as Elena had planned. Tveil Jorik's arrogance was evident in their lack of caution. The general's voice came over an open frequency, dripping with condescension. "Humans, your retreat is futile. Your outdated tactics and primitive weapons are no match for the Ankara Empire. Surrender now, and I may grant you mercy." Elena smirked and keyed her comm link to broadcast on the same channel. "Tveil, you talk too much. Let's see how you handle a real fight." She cut the transmission and turned to Malik. "Now." Malik nodded, relaying the command to the mortar teams. A series of deafening thumps followed as the first volley of mortar shells arced into the sky. The soldiers watched in tense silence as the projectiles climbed higher and higher before descending toward the canyon floor. The explosions were devastating. The shells struck with pinpoint accuracy, their blasts tearing through the Ankara ranks. Walkers toppled like felled trees, their shields useless against the physical projectiles. Drones spiraled out of control, colliding with each other in fiery bursts. The narrow terrain amplified the destruction, trapping soldiers and vehicles in a chaotic bottleneck. Elena watched through her binoculars, her expression unflinching. "Reload and fire again," she ordered. The second volley was even more devastating. The canyon walls shook as more mortar shells rained down, sending rocks and debris crashing onto the Ankara forces. Panic spread through their ranks as soldiers scrambled for cover, their once perfect formation collapsing into chaos. Tveil's voice came over the frequency again, but this time it was filled with anger. "Humans! You dare use such barbaric weapons? This insolence will cost you dearly!" Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. As the Ankara struggled to regroup, Elena's ground teams moved into action. Hidden snipers picked off stragglers, while squads armed with anti-armor explosives targeted the surviving walkers. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the canyon, punctuated by the occasional cheer as another enemy unit fell. Malik sprinted to Elena's position, ducking behind the rocks. "They're trying to pull back, but the debris is blocking their retreat. They're stuck." "Good," Elena replied, her voice sharp. "Keep the pressure on. Don't give them time to think." In the Ankara command tent, Tvail paced furiously, his cape swirling behind him. Reports flooded in, each one worse than the last. His officers avoided his gaze, their fear palpable. How is this possible? Tvail snarled, slamming his clawed hand onto a console. They're using ancient weapons, yet we're losing ground. One of his aides hesitated before speaking. General, their tactics are unconventional. Our shields are ineffective against their projectiles, and the terrain is working against us. Tvail's eyes burned with rage. Enough excuses. Deploy the heavy artillery and clear that canyon. I want nothing left standing. Back in the canyon, Elena's forces braced as the Ankara brought out their plasma artillery. Massive cannons fired bolts of searing energy, scorching the earth and sending shockwaves through the canyon. One mortar position was hit directly, the explosion sending a plume of smoke and debris into the air. Fall back! Elena shouted into her comlink. Regroup at the second line! Her soldiers moved quickly, abandoning their positions and retreating to a series of pre-prepared fallback points. The Ankara artillery pounded the empty mortar sites, unaware they were firing at positions already evacuated. Malik joined Elena, his face streaked with dirt. We're running out of shells, Captain. If this keeps up. It won't, Elena interrupted. Her voice was steady, but her mind raced. She knew they couldn't sustain this battle forever. They needed to end it, and soon. She keyed her comm link again. Harlan, is the last payload ready? Locked and loaded, Harlan replied. But this one's gonna leave a mark. That's the idea, Elena said. She turned to Malik. Get everyone clear of the blast zone. This is going to get messy. The final mortar shell was unlike the others. Packed with an oversized explosive charge, it was designed to bring down the canyon walls themselves. As the Ankara forces advanced further into the trap, Elena gave the command. Fire! The shell soared into the sky, its arc almost graceful. When it hit, the explosion was catastrophic. The entire canyon seemed to shudder as tons of rock came crashing down, burying the Ankara forces beneath an avalanche of debris. The sound was deafening, a mix of explosions, collapsing stone, and the screams of the Ankara soldiers caught in the chaos. When the dust finally settled, the canyon was unrecognizable. The Ankara forces were decimated, their once formidable army reduced to scattered survivors. Elena stood at the edge of the devastation, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Her soldiers gathered around her, their faces weary but triumphant. Malik approached, his expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. We did it, he said. Against all odds, we actually did it. Elena nodded, her gaze distant. This was just one battle. The Ankara won't forget this. They'll come back, stronger and angrier. But next time, Malik said, his voice firm, they'll know what we're capable of. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Yes, they will. And that's the first step toward winning this war. As the soldiers began to cheer, the twin suns rose higher, casting light over the battered canyon. Humanity had stood its ground and won, not with superior technology, but with ingenuity, determination, and an unshakable will to survive.